Sewakwé, you're listening to the Iorì wase front page podcast. In this episode, we talked to Lloyd, Phillips, and Westaway, who became household names in Kahnawake over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. We discussed some of the challenges and successes the community has faced over the past 18 months.
Escape the chaos of the everyday and enjoy the waters of the St. Lawrence River with Splish Splash Sea-Doo and boat rentals. Experience the most incredible selection of 2020 Sea-Doos available, as well as our new 22-foot pontoon boat. With a group or on a solo cruise, we've got a fleet of 4 Sea-Doos equipped with sound system for your water adventures. Sit back and relax with our driver on the 12-seater pontoon for a 4 or 7-hour ride. Visit splishsplashrentals.com or call 438-871-1587 for booking information.
Hello, everybody. My name is Greg Horn, and today we're joined by Commissioner of Public Safety Lloyd Phillips and Kahnawake Memorial Hospital Center Executive Director Westaway. Over the last year and a half or so, they've become household names. We've heard them on the radio. They've been on your TV and your handheld devices at home, and they've been interviewed constantly for Iorì wase, both in our print version and in our multimedia videos, and they're joined here today in the podcast format. Welcome, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Good to be here.
Initially, when we discussed the idea of having this podcast interview, it was as a way to kind of wrap up some of the things that have been going on for the last 16 months or so with the pandemic, and talk about some of the challenges and some of the things that people may not have known about that you guys have been going through. Just the other day, there's been, we now find out we're in the midst of an outbreak of COVID-19. So I guess let's start with that. So whichever one of you guys wants to lead off, and then we can go from there.
So presently we have 17 cases. However, 3 of those 17 are people who are not from Kahnawake, but who are here right now. So 17 cases. One of the 17 cases is fully vaccinated with 2 doses, and one of the 17 cases has 1 dose of the vaccine. However, none of the others are vaccinated. This is just factual information that we're providing regarding vaccination status, because that is a question that people want to know. We have approximately 90 contacts of these 17 cases that some are in isolation, some are not. Again, those who are fully vaccinated are not required to self-isolate. They simply have to monitor their symptoms. And if they do develop symptoms, then they should be tested. So much research has been put out regarding vaccinations, and those people who are fully vaccinated have a very limited, almost impossible ability to transmit the virus unless they have symptoms. And even then, it's decreased quite drastically. So it's very rare to develop COVID if you've been vaccinated, and you require symptoms to be able to transmit. So you can't unknowingly transmit COVID if you're fully vaccinated.
Okay, and I think this is something that we've talked about a lot over the last little while, especially since the vaccination campaign began. About their even though you're vaccinated, you're not 100% protected from getting the virus, right?
That's right. So the goal of the vaccination campaign, the goal of vaccinations, is to protect people from severe complications related to COVID, therefore to protect people from hospitalization and death. It's not to actually stop people from getting COVID, although the vaccines demonstrate a very high efficacy rate. So people getting COVID is drastically reduced when they're vaccinated. And we see that across the world right now with the vaccination rates and the decrease in cases across the board.
With this recent outbreak, is it a surprise that this is happening?
No, well, we expected to get more COVID cases. And in fact, we had said that on several occasions as we release measures, and that's okay. So there's not blame here about the fact that we have COVID. There's not blame for any of this outbreak, actually. We expect to have COVID cases. What's really, really important is that as a community, we learn how to live with COVID in a way that we can live our lives safely and protectively because we still have people who are vulnerable. So even elders who have 2 doses have the chance of getting COVID, especially because efficacy rates decrease the older we are getting vaccinated. Our immune system does not necessarily respond as well as a young, healthy person to the vaccine. We also have under 12-year-olds who are unvaccinated. We have a percentage of the population that's unvaccinated. So we still have vulnerability within the community. So having such high vaccination rates that we have right now is positive, but we still have to maintain measures so that we avoid transmission of the virus in such a large scale. So right now we see many cases of COVID, but it is all within one family. So this could have happened to any of us who probably are, seeing our family members both inside and outside and feel safe within our own families and therefore are not always following the measures as we should when we're with other households. But when we're not vaccinated, we do have to take extra precautions compared to those who are vaccinated. It's not that we want to treat people differently. It's just that we have different levels of risk depending on our vaccination status. So if you're not vaccinated, then the expectation is that you are wearing a mask or following distancing when you're with people so that we're protecting others as much as possible.
We just recently went into the green pandemic alert level. Does this recent outbreak change any of that?
At this point, the answer to that is no. Like when we did our final COVID-19 Facebook Live update, I talked about that moving into green and in the coming weeks, which happened a couple weeks back now. But it also doesn't mean the pandemic is over, right? And this recent outbreak that Lisa was just speaking of, is evidence of the fact that COVID is still here and we're not truly out of the woods of the pandemic. But everything all the measures that are currently in place today, will remain, for the next several weeks till we see things, get stabilize again in the community. And hopefully this outbreak could be now contained, and we'll revisit the measures again in the coming weeks. But unless we see something really going off the rails more and more outbreaks and stuff, and we'd have to reconsider all options. But at this point, that's not something under consideration.
Yeah, and it's important, as I mentioned, that we learn to live with COVID. So we can't keep things locked down forever. We have to just continue on with our lives. But while the community has the education and knowledge in order to be able to do this safely. Now, whether we choose to do so or not is a different story. But, I know that some people have chosen to not be vaccinated, and that's okay. That's people's rights. But we still have a collective responsibility across the board. We're going to gather data from this recent outbreak because that will tell us a lot about vaccination that I think the community needs to know. So just as preliminary information, what we see are some households with several members within the household where part of the household has been vaccinated and another part of the household has not been, where positive cases are emerging for just the non-vaccinated people in the house. So I don't know if I explained that properly, but if you have a total amount of people that live in a household of 10 and a couple become positive, whereas all the others stay negative and those others are vaccinated, well, that tells us something, right? It's just about knowledge and education. And we are seeing that the vaccines are working, but we'll be able to look at that a lot more closely over the coming weeks as we kind of cross-reference that data.
March 2020. When we first seen COVID turn into, it was declared a global pandemic and things started rolling really quickly. Did you guys expect to be here talking about this, all these months later?
That's an easy no. We knew at the time, nobody really knew the timeline, obviously throughout a pandemic since March of 2020. But we figured we were in it for maybe a few months, to see this through and so on. And throughout the March, April, May, we figured by summertime we would kind of be coming out of it. But I don't think anybody envisioned, how things transpired. And basically, in Kahnawake, in state of emergency for 16 months, and very similar, around the world, and in the province of Quebec for sure. And Ontario, they're still not fully open. They still have a lot of measures in place, especially in Ontario. No, we never anticipated this And for us as public health and public safety, we were monitoring this since January of 2020, and as things evolved and we kept an eye on it, then throughout February, we said, oh, this is not looking good. And, sure enough, by March, it really blew up. And we were already in the planning stages, prior to becoming officially a pandemic. It's certainly been a long road, for us, like working very long hours, for a very long period of time. It's taken its toll on. I guess I can speak for myself on a personal level. It's certainly take a toll, and looking at the staff and stuff, that people that work alongside us, and taking a toll on them as well. So it's those are some of the things that like we mentioned at the top of the show about things behind the scenes, so to speak. Right? It's there's a lot of people who are the teams that help us be here, and are important to us. Lisa and I are been the primary, faces and voices and co-leading and guiding and making some decisions on behalf of the community. But we couldn't do that without obviously our support staff and guiding us and giving us input. And at the time, then obviously the full task force, to be involved. But it's been a challenging time, and I could certainly say, and as I want to repeat, as I said on our last Facebook Live, it's like, I guess every skill and every ounce of knowledge that I gained throughout my career, and whether it be education or my years on council and other positions as a paramedic and firefighter, and were certainly put to the test and challenged, and had to create some new knowledge and new ways of doing things, in between.
There was a lot of challenge, a lot of hard decisions that had to be made. How difficult was it to make some of those decisions, like shutting down businesses and closing the community for the first part of this pandemic?
Well, it was obviously very difficult, to be honest. I mean, the first set of closures was somewhat, even though it was hard and it was tough, it was somewhat easier because everybody was on board right in the beginning, because nobody knew what we were facing here. So when they seen the world basically starting to shut down and close, and so it was like, even though it was still tough, it was easier because that was our only defense at the time. But doesn't make it any easier. But then, but other decisions, and then the second wave when we had to restart closing things back down again, then that's when it really started getting much more difficult. And literally, like spending days pondering a decision that has to be made, and end up there were those literally sleepless nights and early mornings, and you're debating what's the best way to go, and are we debating is this the right decision, yes or no? Is it premature to make a decision now, or can we wait? And if we wait, is it too late by the time we react? So it was hard to try to make decisions in a preventative manner and try to relay that to the community, because if the community didn't see at times the threat that we seen, and so we're taking preventative measures. So people will say, well, you're acting too harshly, or you're being too strict, or whatever. But no, we were able to predict what we seen coming, and we took some flack for that over the months, but we stood by our decisions, and up until this past June, I think with 0 deaths in our community, like I said, I think that our decisions proved to be correct, even though how hard they were at times. And it was tough, because you knew whatever you were deciding, when an increase in measures or decrease in increasing them, or making them stricter, or making them, or relaxing them, it's going to have a direct impact on somebody's life, on your personal freedoms, on people's businesses, on how the community operates, and so on. So, they weren't taken lightly at all. And they're still not, because like we said, we're still not 100% out of the woods. Some decisions still have to be made, and we do our darndest to keep our eye on the goal there.
Yeah, I don't think I can add that much, but I guess that's really the point, is that every decision we made, we knew there were impacts to, again, human rights, to economics, to psychosocial and spiritual well-being. No matter the situation, every single decision we had to make impacted somebody personally. And we often, and what people don't realize is, we often had to speak to those individuals on a daily basis about the impacts that we were making in their lives, because of course people are very vocal, which they have the right to be. So, and it was so important to us, and it still is, to be as open and transparent and honest as possible with every decision we made. Although sometimes we had to make decisions really quickly, we couldn't necessarily communicate as well as we would have wanted to. But that was the main hallmark of everything that we did in the past year and a half, was to communicate as openly and transparently as possible, to provide as much information. But people don't see all of that, all the information that you're providing, or they perceive it differently than how it was meant to be released, or whatever the case may be, or people judge the decisions based on how it impacts them personally. So that was probably the most difficult part, is knowing how you were affecting people's lives on a day-to-day basis, but feeling confident in the direction you were going in because it was based on facts and science and data. Everything was data-driven. So yes, we were always confident in the direction we were going, but was it easy? No, never easy.
Yeah, exactly. And no, throughout the height of the pandemic and wave 1, 2, and 3, and we rarely, if any time, really talked about ourselves, and I think once or twice I may have mentioned it on Facebook Live. We're living this too. It's not like somehow we were immune to the decisions that were made. We have to make the decisions, and we're restricted just as much as everybody else was. And because some of the critics, if you want to call them that, were somehow had this illusion that we're somehow immune to some of the decisions, but we lived it just as much as everybody else did, and maybe even more so at times, because we were at the heart of it, and working and trying to mitigate and respond to the pandemic, but at the same time we have family as well, that we have to look after and look after ourselves too, and it was again challenging to say the least.
Yeah, and then then later on in 2020, the news start coming out about vaccines, and then maybe that's the light at the end of the tunnel, right? And then you start seeing different things, and then the work to get a vaccination center here. How did that all come about? I think people may not realize that it wasn't a fait accompli to have a vaccination center here.
No. There was a lot of work that was done behind the scenes to make that happen. Of course, it is our right to have our own vaccination center here, but it wasn't just a natural occurrence. So to actually get the vaccines earlier than the rest of the population and to have the vaccination site here was just, a lot of work that was done behind the scenes.
Well, and I'll give credit where credit is due. It was primarily due to Lisa's work and her team, and her connections and knowledge of the healthcare system, and to really get the ball moving and making sure we secure the vaccines early for our community. And so that was the big driving force behind that, and then coordinating internally, working with the Mingo Hall and their management staff over there and the board of directors, and everything just fell together nicely. But again, a lot of moving parts there. We were fortunate, as a community, to have vaccination center right here, and it proved to work out well. We're closed up from there now. We're moving at the end of the month. We're going to have another set up at the sports complex, for another round of vaccinations for the younger population, but as well, we're never going to say no to anybody who wants to get their first vaccination, or if somebody's eligible for their second.
And how long are you guys going to be set up there?
Not very long. I'm sure hockey's going to start and they're going to kick us out. Well, our vaccination campaign is really generally over at this time. So we have a few more days set up for second doses, which will be at the end of July. After that, we'll probably vaccinate at the hospital, I would say, because it'll be fewer and fewer people as we go. So we're fortunate because we continue to vaccinate first doses for community members. They keep calling and we keep vaccinating. So that's great. So that means that we'll have, every time we do a new first dose, we have a second dose to do 4 weeks after that. So until we've completed all the second doses, we'll continue to vaccinate in the community. But as those numbers dwindle, then we'll be sending community members to the mobile clinics across Montreal and Montérégie, because we won't be able to continue to do that, because you can't just vaccinate one person at a time. You need to be able to vaccinate 13 people at a time, so that when you open a vial, you're not wasting doses. So once we're no longer able to do that, then we will probably stop vaccinating within the community.
What's the future of vaccinations, right? I mean, there was talk about, maybe having to get a booster shot after so much time. And, do we know any definitive answers yet? No,
we don't have definitive answers. So what we are still waiting for is approval from Health Canada for Pfizer vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds, for under 12-year-olds, sorry. So we're still waiting for that. And the latest we hear is that that's expected sometime around September, but we're hoping that it happens more quickly so that we have a safer return to school. And Third doses, what we're seeing in research right now is that we are expecting to need a third booster shot or a third dose for the elder population who are not necessarily responding. They're not working as well at the same efficacy rate for that age group. So we expect to have to do a third dose for that age group. But again, this is all very preliminary data. So until we know more, then we can't move forward. But we expect to get that information, I guess, in the next little while. And if when that comes out, then we will do that within the community.
What are some of the biggest lessons that you guys learned, and I think in the community learned over the last year and a half or so?
Good question. Well, I guess in terms of, lessons, and certainly, on the positive side, the community spirit is still there, and our community really does pull together, and when we have a threat of any sort in Kahnawake, in this case, it was the virus, and the vast majority of people pulled together and worked, for the common goal of protecting the most vulnerable in the whole community. And that's a large part of the success, is just the community spirit and, or organizations, working together and not, really worrying about where the employees are working, as long as they're working and, and collaboratively and stuff of that nature for, also like helped. So I think that's one thing I could say for sure, that spirit of our communities is still alive and well. Mind you, it's longer this goes on, the more that gets strained, right? And I know everybody's sick and tired of talking about pandemic and sick and tired of hearing about vaccinations and sick and tired of whatever else and sick and tired of hearing my voice. I'm sick and tired of talking about it, believe me. No longer goes on and then people, get much more critical, right? And it's easy to go on Facebook and, punch in and say whatever you want. Doesn't make it fact. I'm glad to see it's only a small minority, because when I walk down the streets in Kahnawake, I go for walks or I meet people at the market or wherever, and it's like many people saying thank you and great job and thumbs up and stuff. So I know those people on Facebook are the minority.
That collaboration has been really great between the organizations. What the community was able to accomplish in that short period of time, what was built in order to face this virus, is really quite something to be proud of within the community. Both community response, but also organizationally, what we were able to build in terms of financial support, housing, food security, community policing, public health, the testing site, the vaccination center, all these things that didn't necessarily exist in such a collaborative, holistic way to respond to the needs and the communications and the community response. All of that together is what really created such a wonderful success. I think another positive is that through COVID, the community became better able to express their trauma, not just as a result of COVID, but of many other situations that happened to arise during the course of the last year and a half or that happened prior. I think people have become more vocal and have been able to express themselves in a more positive way, in a negative way also, but we'll take the positive and I think that that's something that is a good step towards healing that maybe didn't exist before. A lot of pain and trauma was swept under the rug, and now people are expressing themselves more. Even if it's expressed in a negative way, that's still an expression, and that's something that the organizations can work with addressing. So those are positive impacts, really, of what's happened in the past year and a half. And I hope that continues, because it allows, like I said, services to be developed, people to express themselves, and that's always a path towards positive outcomes. I guess that collaboration between the organizations, hopefully that will continue as well, because there were silos that were broken down as a result of COVID that could be helpful in the future when facing other threats or other difficulties or, just regular community needs. Those are all positive things as well. So all in all, I think we have a lot to look forward to in terms of how we work towards meeting needs and developing services in the future.
Okay, any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. That's always that question, right? People say, well, anything else to say? Then you say no, but, and you keep talking. No, it's always been, we said this, it can't be said enough about the timeline and how long an emergency lasted. And under a state of emergency, or even, with the task force, any emergency, it's usually a very finite period of time, right? It's a couple of days, a couple of weeks at the most, whether it be a flood or whether it be something of that nature, or major power outage. We've seen the ice storm in the past. Again, it was like a few tough weeks, but it was over. That's how the systems are designed in terms of emergency preparedness law, incident command system, which we also call the task force, as emergency preparedness. And no plans were meant for this long. So we said it before about we had no playbook for this, and so it was just everybody's collective knowledge and collective leadership abilities, and saying, okay, where do we go from here? And making decisions and trying to predict what's happening, and what's to come down days and weeks to come. So it was like really like a chess match, when we had to, plan 2 or 3 moves ahead, and sometimes with only half the information, because the information was changing on a day-to-day basis at times. And so we had to navigate through that. So, hats off to everybody who was involved. And it's like, working with the team that we had, couldn't have asked for a better team, to be able to carry on what we had to do.
And there really is no final word, because this is far from over. Unfortunately, as we see in other parts of the world that have much higher double vaccination rates than we do here in Canada, or even in North America, we know that we're probably going to face kind of a backwards trend come September. And so, we're already kind of gearing up for that, maybe going to take some vacations so that we can be ready to deal with that in September. But it's far from over. So there's no final words yet.
Yeah, maybe the end of a chapter, maybe not the end of the book.
Yeah.
But we certainly hope so. And a matter of fact, just watching the news this afternoon, national news, and they're talking about the fall time and a 4th wave, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, unfortunately. But by having enough people fully vaccinated, and people abiding by the basic health measures, that could be a little ripple. It doesn't have to be a wave. That's, again, maybe a part of the message is, for those people who are not vaccinated, that's the end. That's the solution. At the end of the day, in my opinion, is enough people get vaccinated. If that 4th wave comes, or when it comes, it could be a small ripple, and we don't got to look at additional measures at that point in time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we'll be talking to you again probably in the next few weeks and months. So Nyaogoa. Thank you for listening to the Iorì Wase Front Page Podcast. I'm Greg Horn, and Iorì Wase would like to thank the Community Media Strategic Support Fund for supporting this initiative.